when tech billionaire Evelyn Cross collapsed in a crowded restaurant, choking and seconds from death. Dozens of witnesses froze in horror, but one man, a tired father in worn work clothes, eating his first real meal in weeks, moved without hesitation and saved her life with his bare hands. Then he vanished before anyone could learn his name. What she discovered when she finally found him would shatter everything she believed about power, worth, and what it means to be a hero. If you want to know how a single moment of courage changed two lives forever and sparked a quiet revolution, stay with me until the very end. And please hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The restaurant hummed with the kind of low, sophisticated murmur that only money could buy. Crystal chandeliers cast warm amber light across white tablecloths, and the soft clink of silverware against fine china created a rhythm of refined civility. This was Luminaire, one of the city's most exclusive establishments, where reservations required weeks of advance notice and a willingness to spend what most people earned in a month. Evelyn Cross sat alone at a corner table, her posture perfect despite the exhaustion she carried like a second skin. At 42, she was the founder and CEO of Quantum Dynamics, a tech empire worth $3 billion. Her charcoal suit was tailored to perfection, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek twist that revealed the sharp angles of her face. She'd spent the day in back-to-back board meetings, navigating hostile investors, and deflecting another takeover attempt. This dinner was supposed to be her reward: 2 hours of silence, exceptional food, and freedom from the constant demands of running an empire. She took a measured sip of her wine, letting the complexity unfold on her palate. Around her, the restaurant's other patrons leaned toward each other in intimate conversation, their laughter carefully modulated to avoid disturbing neighbors. Evelyn had specifically requested this table because it offered the illusion of privacy, tucked into an alcove where she could observe without being observed. Across the dining room, separated by perhaps 30 feet and an entire universe of circumstance, Mark Reynolds sat at a much smaller table near the kitchen doors. At 32, he looked older than his years. His face carried the particular weariness that comes from working 2 jobs while raising a child alone, the kind of tired that sleep never quite erased. His clothes were clean, but noticeably worn, khakis that had seen too many wash cycles, and a button-down shirt that had been carefully ironed, despite fraying at the collar. This dinner represented something precious to Mark. For the first time in 8 months, his daughter Sophie was at a sleepover, and he'd received his quarterly bonus from the warehouse where he worked nights. Instead of immediately putting the money toward bills or Sophie's ever-owing medical expenses, he'd made an impulsive decision. He'd walked into Luminaire, fully expecting to be turned away, but the hostess had simply smiled and shown him to this table near the back. The menu prices had made his stomach clench, but he'd ordered anyway. The house special, a modest wine, nothing extravagant. Just one evening where he could sit in a beautiful space and eat food he hadn't microwaved or assembled from a drive-through bag. Just 2 hours where he wasn't Mark the warehouse worker or Mark the struggling single dad, but simply a man enjoying a good meal. He watched the other diners with quiet fascination, noting the ease with which they inhabited this world. The couple 3 tables over didn't even glance at prices before ordering. The businessman near the window spoke on his phone with the casual confidence of someone who'd never worried about being overheard, and the woman in the corner, the one sitting alone with the bearing of royalty, she seemed to exist in a bubble of perfect, untouchable calm. Mark had no idea he was looking at Evelyn Cross. He didn't follow business news or recognize the faces that graced magazine covers. To him, she was simply another person in an expensive restaurant, living a life he couldn't imagine. The waiter approached Evelyn's table with practiced deference. "Your entree, Miss Cross." Pan-seared chili and sea bass, with a champagne beurre blanc micro-greens from our rooftop garden and truffle-infused fingerling potatoes. "Thank you, Day," Evelyn said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. She picked up her fork, examining the presentation with the critical eye of a perfectionist. Everything in her life had to be exceptional. Mediocrity was unacceptable, whether in quarterly earnings or plating aesthetics. She cut into the fish, appreciating the perfect sear, and brought the first bite to her lips. The flavors were exquisite, buttery, delicate, with subtle notes of truffle and lemon. She chewed slowly, savoring both the taste and the rare moment of solitude. Then something went wrong. The piece of fish seemed to catch in her throat, lodging with sudden, terrifying completeness. Evelyn's eyes widened as she tried to swallow, but nothing moved. She reached for her water glass, but her hand froze halfway there as panic overrode muscle memory. Her throat closed tighter. No air, no sound. She tried to cough, but her airway was completely blocked. The restaurant's ambient noise, the conversations, the music, the gentle clink of dishes suddenly seemed very far away, muffled by the rushing sound in her ears. Evelyn stood abruptly, her chair scraping backward. Her hands went to her throat in the universal sign of choking, but her movements were already becoming uncoordinated. The woman who commanded boardrooms and made decisions affecting thousands of employees couldn't make her body obey the simplest command. Breathe. The couple at the nearest table noticed first. The woman's eyes widened. "Oh my God, is she? Someone help," the man called out, his voice breaking the restaurant's sophisticated calm like a stone. Through glass, heads turned, conversation stopped mid-sentence. The gentle background music that had seemed so pleasant moments ago now felt obscene, cheerful notes playing over a developing tragedy. Evelyn stumbled, her hip catching the edge of her table. Wine glasses toppled, red liquid spreading across white linen like blood. She couldn't think clearly anymore. Her vision was starting to narrow, edges going dark. Somewhere in the back of her oxygen-starved mind, she registered the absurdity. She was Evelyn Cross. She'd survived hostile takeovers and ruthless competitors and the cutthroat world of Silicon Valley. And she was going to die choking on fish in a restaurant full of people. The matra rushed forward, his professional composure cracking. "Does anyone know the Heimlich maneuver?" "Someone call 911. Someone called 911. A man in an expensive suit half rose from his chair, then sat back down, clearly hoping someone else would act. A woman pulled out her phone, but seemed frozen, unsure whether to record or actually call for help. The businessman by the window stood but didn't move closer, his face pale with uncertainty. This was the strange reality of crisis among the comfortable. Surrounded by successful, educated people, Evelyn was dying because no one knew what to do or was willing to risk doing it wrong, except one person. Mark had been cutting into his own meal, a far simpler dish than Evelyn's, but still the best thing he'd eaten in months when the commotion started. His head snapped up at the woman's cry, and his eyes immediately found Evelyn. He saw her hands at her throat, saw the panic in her eyes, saw the way she was swaying on her feet. He didn't think. Thinking took time Sophie didn't have when she had asthma attacks in the middle of the night. Thinking meant hesitation, and hesitation meant consequences he'd learned to avoid. Mark was moving before his conscious mind had fully registered the decision. His chair toppled backward as he stood. He crossed the restaurant in long, fast strides, dodging between tables with the efficiency of someone who'd spent years navigating crowded warehouse floors. "Excuse me, coming through," he said, his voice calm but carrying absolute authority. The crowd parted instinctively, responding to his certainty. He reached Evelyn just as her knees started to buckle. Up close, he could see the blue tinge starting at her lips, could see that her eyes, though wide with fear, were beginning to lose focus. Seconds. That's all he had. Maybe not even that. "Ma'am, I'm going to help you," Mark said, positioning himself behind her. His voice was steady, the same tone he used when Sophie woke up gasping for air at 2 a.m. Calm, confident, capable. "This is going to feel uncomfortable, but I need you to trust me." He wrapped his arms around her midsection, one hand forming a fist just above her navel, the other grasping it firmly. He could feel her ribcage expanding as her body desperately tried to draw air that wouldn't come. Could feel the fine tremors running through her as panic and oxygen deprivation took hold. Evelyn's hands clutched at his arms, her grip surprisingly strong despite her weakening state. In some distant part of her fading consciousness, she registered the worn fabric of his shirt, the callous strength of his hands, the solid certainty of high, sense presence behind her. Mark pulled inward and upward with controlled force, delivering the first thrust of the Heimlich maneuver exactly as he'd learned it from the free CPR class at Sophie's school. Nothing. He repositioned slightly, adjusted his grip, and delivered a second thrust, harder this time. The restaurant had gone completely silent, except for someone's phone clattering to the floor and the distant sound of sirens. The 911 call was already working its way through the system, ambulance en route but too slow, far too slow. Third thrust. Mark felt Evelyn's body jerk against his, felt her try to draw breath, and fail. His own heart was pounding now, but his hands remained steady. He'd done this before with Sophie, had saved his daughter's life. 3 times when she was younger, and before they'd gotten her asthma under control. He knew what failure looked like, and he wasn't going to let it happen here. "Come on," he murmured so quietly, only Evelyn could have heard if she'd still been fully conscious. "Come on, you're not done yet." Fourth thrust. This one with every ounce of controlled strength he possessed. The obstruction dislodged. The piece of fish shot from Evelyn's throat and landed on the carpet, several feet away. For one terrible second, nothing else happened, and then Evelyn drew in a great gasping, ragged breath. The sound of it seemed to fill the entire restaurant. Raw and desperate and absolutely beautiful, she sagged against Mark, her legs unable to support her weight. He lowered them both carefully to the floor, keeping one arm around her shoulders as she coughed and gasped, drawing in oxygen like someone who'd just surfaced from deep water. "That's it," Mark said softly, his hand steady on her back. "Just breathe nice and slow. You're okay now." Then, the restaurant erupted. Applause broke out, scattered at first and then building to a crescendo. Voices overlapped in excited chatter, everyone suddenly wanting to narrate what they just witnessed, to claim some small part of the drama. "Did you see that? He saved her life. That was incredible. Someone get him a drink. Get him whatever he wants." The mat appeared at Mark's side, his face flushed with relief and gratitude. "Sir, I cannot thank you enough. That was extraordinary. Please, you and the lady, your meals are absolutely on the house." But Mark was already standing, gently steadying Evelyn before releasing her into the care of a waiter who'd rushed over with a chair. Evelyn looked up at him, her face still pale, but color returning, her eyes now sharp and focused despite the trauma she'd just endured. She tried to speak, but her throat was raw, the words emerging as barely more than a whisper. "Wait, I need to thank you." Mark shook his head, already backing away. The attention was becoming overwhelming. People were standing now, some with phones out, cameras pointed in his direction. The last thing he wanted was to become a spectacle, to have his face plastered across social media, to have Sophie see her dad in videos with people calling him a hero when he'd just done what anyone should do. "You don't need to thank me," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm just glad you're all right. But I don't even know your name." "You don't need to," Mark replied. He glanced at the gathering crowd, at the phones, at the matter who was clearly about to launch into more outs of gratitude. "Just take care of yourself, okay?" He turned and walked away, navigating back through the tables toward his own abandoned meal. Behind him, the excited chatter continued. People already constructing narratives about what they'd witnessed, each version slightly different, drama building with each retelling. The matra followed him, practically stumbling in his haste. "Sir, please, at least let me your meal. We'll prepare anything you'd like. The finest wine, dessert, absolutely everything." "That's kind of you," Mark said, reaching his table and pulling out his wallet. "But I should probably go. How much do I owe for what I ordered?" The matter D looked offended. "Sir, after what you just did, you couldn't possibly. We couldn't accept." Mark placed three $20 bills on the table, more than enough to cover his modest order, plus a generous tip. "I appreciate it, I really do, but I'd rather just pay and head home." He could see the man wanted to argue, but something in Mark's expression, a quiet dignity, a firm unwillingness to be made into something he wasn't, stopped him. The matra nodded slowly, accepting the bills with obvious reluctance. "At the very least," he said, "please allow me to give you my card. If you ever wish to dine with us again, it would be our honor to host you." Mark accepted the card to be polite, knowing he'd never use it. This wasn't his world, and one emergency didn't change that. He glanced once more toward the corner where Evelyn now sat, surrounded by concerned staff and fellow diners. Their eyes met across the room for just a moment. She raised one hand slightly, a gesture that might have been acknowledgement or gratitude, or simply farewell. Mark nodded once and left through the main entrance, stepping out into the cool evening air. The street was quieter than the restaurant had been, normal city sounds replacing the drama he'd left behind. He stood for a moment, letting his heart rate settle, his hands still slightly shaky from adrenaline. His phone buzzed, a text from Sophie's friend's mother. "Having a great time. Sophie's already asleep. No rush picking her up in the morning." Mark smiled despite everything, relief flooding through him. Sophie was safe, happy, enjoying a normal childhood moment. That was what mattered, not the scene in the restaurant. Not the scene in the restaurant. And not the woman whose life he'd saved. Not the attention he just fled. Just Sophie, sleeping peacefully, unburdened by worry or responsibility. He started walking toward the bus stop, his hands in his pockets, already mentally shifting back to his regular life. Tomorrow he'd be back at the warehouse loading trucks and processing inventory. Tomorrow this would be a strange story he might tell Sophie someday when she was older. Tomorrow everything would be normal again. He had no idea that normal had just ended forever. Inside Luminaire, Evelyn sat in the chair the waiter had provided, a glass of water in her trembling hands. Her throat ached, her chest felt bruised, and she was acutely aware of how close she'd come to dying. But more than any of that, she was aware of the absence of the man who'd saved her. "Miss Cross, the ambulance is here," her assistant said, appearing from nowhere with the efficiency that made her invaluable. Rachel must have been called the moment the incident started. "They want to check you over, and I really think I'm fine," Evelyn said, her voice rough but functional. "I don't mean with respect. You absolutely do need medical attention," Rachel interrupted. One of the few people who could get away with contradicting Evelyn Cross. "You just choked and nearly died." "Protocol requires fine." Evelyn stood, accepting the arm Rachel offered for support. Her legs were steadier now, but the adrenaline was fading, leaving exhaustion in its wake. "But first, I need to know who that man was." "The one who already working on it," Rachel said, guiding her toward the entrance where paramedics were setting up. "I've got the restaurant pulling up his reservation, credit card receipt, anything they have. We'll find him." But when Rachel made the inquiries, she hit an immediate wall. The maitre checked his records, confusion creasing his features. "That's odd. He didn't have a reservation. Walk in, paid cash for his meal before he left." He paused, checking again. "I gave him my card, but he didn't give me his name." "I'm sorry, Miss Cross. I didn't think to ask." Evelyn felt something strange stirring in her chest. Not just gratitude, but genuine curiosity. In her world, everyone wanted something. Favors, connections, opportunities, recognition. She'd built her empire understanding that fundamental truth about human nature. People didn't act without expecting returns. But this man, this stranger in worn clothes, who'd moved with such certainty, who'd saved her life with such competence, had walked away from the attention, the free meals, the opportunity to network with one of the country's wealthiest CEOs. He'd refused the spotlight and disappeared back into anonymity, as if saving lives was just something he did between courses. "Someone must have recorded it," Rachel said, already scrolling through social media on her phone. "People were filming. We'll find footage, identify him from that." "Do it," Evelyn said. Then, as the paramedics approached with their equipment, she added more quietly, "I need to thank him properly. I need to know who he is." The lead paramedic, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, began her assessment. "Miss Cross, I'm going to ask you some questions and check your vitals. Can you tell me exactly what happened?" As Evelyn recounted the incident, she found herself focusing not on the terror of choking, but on the moment the stranger's arms had wrapped around her, the calm authority in his voice, the absolute certainty of his movements, the way he'd known exactly what to do while everyone else had frozen. "You're very lucky," the paramedic said, checking Evelyn's oxygen levels. "Another 30 seconds, and this could have ended very differently. The person who helped you, was it someone you knew?" "No," Evelyn said so, "and fitly a complete stranger, then you're lucky twice over," the paramedic replied. "Most people panic in situations like that. Even people who know the Heimlich maneuver theoretically often can't execute it under pressure. Whoever helped you has either been trained extensively or has done it before. Or both," Evelyn thought. Something about the man's demeanor had suggested experience, the kind that came from real emergencies, not certification courses. She thought about his clothes, clean but worn, the kind people bought at discount stores and wore until they fell apart, the calluses she'd felt on his hands, the way he'd refused recognition. This wasn't a good Samaritan looking for positive PR or a networking opportunity. This was someone who'd helped because helping was necessary, then left because staying would have been uncomfortable. It had been a very long time since Evelyn had encountered anyone who didn't want something from her. "I'd like to transport you to the hospital for observation," the paramedic was saying. "Injuries from choking aren't always immediately apparent." "And I'll go," Evelyn agreed, surprising both the paramedic and Rachel. Normally, Evelyn argued against anything that disrupted her schedule, but tonight she was tired, shaken, and acutely aware of her own mortality. "But Rachel stays with me, and she keeps working on finding that man." Already on it, Rachel confirmed, her fingers flying across her phone screen. "First posts are going up now. Mystery hero saves tech CEO. Twitter's already building a narrative." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, both grateful for and exhausted by the machinery of modern attention. Within hours, this would be a trending story. Within days, someone would identify the stranger from footage or photos. Her PR team would spin it. Her competitors would analyze it. And the man who'd wanted nothing but to slip away quietly would be ragged into the spotlight whether he liked it or not. Part of her felt guilty about that, but a larger part, the part that had built an empire through relentless determination, needed to find him, needed to thank him, needed to thank him, needed to thank him, needed to understand why someone would save a stranger's life and then refuse the world's gratitude. As the paramedics helped her into the ambulance, Evelyn took one last look at Luminaire. The restaurant had returned to its normal rhythm. The crisis already becoming a story people would tell for weeks. Her overturned table had been cleared and reset. The wine stain would be dealt with by morning. Everything would go back to how it was. But Evelyn knew she couldn't. Something had shifted in that moment when death had seemed certain, and a stranger's hands had pulled her back. Some fundamental assumption about the world and the people in it had cracked. She'd spent 20 years believing that everyone had an angle, that altruism was just enlightened self-interest in disguise, that kindness always came with strings attached. It was how you survived in business, how you protected yourself from being used. But the man who'd saved her life had had the perfect opportunity to leverage her gratitude, and he'd walked away from it without hesitation. Evelyn leaned back against the ambulance stretcher, feeling the vehicle's movement as it pulled away from the restaurant. Rachel sat beside her, still working her phone with single-minded focus. "Got something," Rachel said suddenly. "Short video, 23 seconds, posted 4 minutes ago. You can't see his face clearly, but..." She held up her phone. Evelyn watched the shaky footage, seeing herself from an outside perspective for the first time, seeing how completely she'd collapsed, how genuinely dire the situation had been, and seeing him moving with purpose through the frozen crowd, positioning himself with practiced deaf-eye, science executing the Heimlich with textbook precision. Then, the moment when she'd gasped that first breath and he'd lowered them both to the floor, his hands steady on her back, his voice too quiet for the video to capture, the way he'd stood and backed away, almost immediately, discomfort written in every line of his body as applause built around him. "Run facial recognition," Evelyn said. "Pull the clearest frame and send it to our security team. Someone at Quantum must have software that can enhance it." "Already in progress," Rachel confirmed. "Though his face is partially blocked in every angle I found so far, he seemed to instinctively avoid direct camera exposure." Interesting, Evelyn thought. Not the behavior of someone seeking attention, not the behavior of most people at all, in the age of social media, where everyone performed their lives for invisible audiences. The ambulance pulled up to the emergency room entrance. As the doors opened and Evelyn was wheeled inside, she made a decision. She would find this man. She would thank him properly. And if he needed anything at all, she would make sure he got it. It was the least she could do for someone who'd given her back her life and asked for nothing in return. She just had no idea yet that finding him would be the easy part. Understanding him would be something else entirely. The video went viral before midnight. Rachel sat in the hospital waiting room, her laptop balanced on her knees, watching the numbers climb with the detached fascination of someone who'd spent years managing digital narratives. Views, shares, comments, all multiplying at exponential rates as the algorithm picked up the story and fed it to millions of screens across the country. "Mystery hero saves billionaire CEO and vanishes." Read one headline. Another proclaimed the man who refused fame after saving a life. A third, more cynical, tech chokes unknown savior disappears. Who is he? The comment sections were already building their own mythology. Some praised the mystery man's humility. Others speculated about his motives. Was he hiding something? Running from the law? Avoiding child support? A few insisted the whole thing was staged, that nothing genuine could happen without cameras and contracts pre-arranged. Rachel filtered through it all with practiced efficiency, flagging the useful information and discarding the noise. 3 different angles of video now, none with a clear shot of the man's face. Dozens of eyewitness accounts, each slightly different, drama inflating with each retelling, and buried in the comments of the second video. One detail that made her pause. A user named JennyM_1987 had written, "That looks like the guy who works night shift at Riverside Logistics. Same build, same walk. He's there when I drop my brother off for his shift." Rachel immediately cross-referenced Riverside Logistics, a mid-sized warehouse and distribution center on the industrial side of town. She made a note, sent a message to Quantum security team, and glanced toward the examination room where Evelyn was being observed. Inside. Evelyn sat on the edge of the hospital bed, tolerating the nurse's final checks with barely concealed impatience. The doctor had already cleared her. Bruised ribs, strained throat, instructions to rest and stay hydrated, but no serious damage. She'd been lucky, he'd said, using that word again. Lucky that someone had known what to do. Lucky that he'd acted quickly. Lucky to be alive. You can go home now, Miss Cross, the nurse said, making notes on a tablet. But I want you to promise me you'll actually rest. No work for at least 48 hours. Of course, Evelyn lied smoothly. She had board presentations in 3 days and a product launch to finalize. Rest was a luxury she couldn't afford, near-death experience or not. The nurse gave her a look that suggested she'd heard similar promises from driven professionals before and knew exactly how much they were worth. The discharge papers will be ready in a few minutes. Your assistant said, your car is already here. Evelyn nodded, already mentally cataloging the work that had piled up during her absence. But underneath the familiar rhythm of professional obligations, something else nagged at her. The image of the stranger's face, half turned away from cameras, and the question that wouldn't leave her alone. Who was he? Rachel appeared in the doorway, laptop under one arm, phone in the other hand. The posture of someone with news. We might have a lead. Someone thinks they recognize him from a warehouse job. I've got people checking employment records now. Good. Evelyn stood, accepting the bag of personal items Rachel handed her. I want to know by morning. You should also know that the story's gotten bigger. It's trending on 3 platforms. Entertainment Tonight wants a statement. So does the local news. Your PR team has drafted something appropriately grateful and mysterious. Plays well with the narrative. Send it, Evelyn said, though part of her bristled at the manipulation. This was her life that had been saved, not a marketing opportunity. But she'd learned long ago that refusing to shape narratives just meant someone else shaped them for you, and rarely in your favor. They walked through the hospital corridor together, Rachel automatically clearing their path with a combination of authority and strategic positioning. A few people recognized Evelyn, did double takes, whispered to companions. One young man actually pulled out his phone before the sharp look Rachel gave him made him reconsider. The town car was waiting at the entrance, Evelyn's regular driver holding the door. Marcus had worked for 6 years and knew better than to ask questions when she looked like this, exhausted and irritable and in no mood for small talk. Home, Miss Cross? He asked quietly. Office, Evelyn said, ignoring Rachel's sharp intake of breath. I need to check on a few things before. With respect, you need sleep, Rachel interrupted. The doctor said rest. Your body just experienced trauma and you're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion. Evelyn wanted to argue. The instinct to push through, to never show weakness, was bone deep after 20 years of fighting for every inch of success in a male-dominated industry. But she was tired in a way that went beyond physical. The adrenaline crash had left her hollow, and her throat ached with every swallow. Fine. Home, she conceded, sliding into the car. But I want updates every hour on the search. Every 3 hours, Rachel countered, getting in beside her. You need actual sleep, not to be checking your phone all night. Evelyn didn't respond, which Rachel correctly interpreted as reluctant agreement. As Marcus pulled away from the hospital, Evelyn stared out the window at the city sliding past. Late-night traffic, illuminated storefronts, people going about their normal lives completely unaware that hers had just been saved by a stranger. Rachel, she said after a moment, why do you think he left? Rachel looked up from her phone, surprise flickering across her features. Evelyn rarely asked questions she didn't already know the answer to. Some people don't want attention, or maybe he had somewhere to be. He refused free meals at one of the city's finest restaurants, refused recognition, refused to even give his name. Evelyn kept her gaze on the window. In my experience, everyone wants something, but he didn't. Maybe his thing is not wanting things, Rachel suggested. Some people are just genuinely humble, or he's hiding something. And you don't really believe that? It wasn't a question. Evelyn didn't answer, because Rachel was right. Whatever else a stranger might be, her instincts, honed by decades of reading people, of identifying threats and opportunities, said he wasn't hiding criminal intent. He was hiding himself, which was different, more interesting. They drove in silence for several minutes before Rachel spoke again. The warehouse lead is looking promising, by the way. Riverside Logistics has about 80 employees on night shift. Security team should be able to narrow it down by morning. We can have a name by tomorrow afternoon. And then Rachel hesitated. Then what? We send him a thank you card, offer him money. I'm honestly not sure what the protocol is for this situation. Evelyn wasn't sure either, which was a rare and uncomfortable feeling. She was a woman who operated on clear objectives and defined outcomes. But this situation defied her normal frameworks. You couldn't exactly send a fruit basket to someone who'd saved your life, and given his refusal of recognition, showing up with money would likely be insulting. We find him first, Evelyn said finally. Figure out the rest after that. The car pulled up to her building, a converted industrial space in the city's revitalized waterfront district. Expense minimalist, the kind of place featured in architecture magazines. Evelyn thanked Marcus and headed upstairs, Rachel following to make sure she actually made it to her apartment. "I'll be fine from here," Evelyn said at her door, recognizing Rachel's protective hovering for what it was. "Text me when you're settled," Rachel insisted. "And remember, no work emails, no midnight strategy sessions, actual rest. Good night, Rachel." Alone in her apartment, Evelyn stood in the dark for a long moment before turning on the lights. The space was beautiful in the way of places designed to impress rather than comfort. High ceilings, exposed brick, furniture that cost more than most people's cars. She'd bought it because it made a statement about her success, but she'd never quite managed to make it feel like home. She poured herself a glass of water, mindful of the doctor's instructions, and sat on her designer couch with her laptop. She knew she should sleep, but her mind was too active, thoughts circling back to the restaurant, to those seconds when everything had gone dark and she'd felt certain she was dying, and to the stranger who'd pulled her back from that edge without hesitation. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mother, who somehow always knew when something happened, despite Evelyn's best efforts to manage information flow. "I saw the news. Are you all right? Call me when you can." Evelyn stared at the message, debating whether to respond now or wait until morning when she'd have the energy for her mother's particular brand of concerned interrogation. She was still deciding when her phone rang, her mother not willing to wait. "I'm fine," Evelyn said by way of greeting. "You nearly died choking in a restaurant." Her mother's voice carried the sharp clarity of someone who'd raised 3 children, mostly alone after divorce. "That doesn't qualify as fine. I'm home. I saw a doctor. I'm perfectly healthy. It was just a freak accident. The news is saying some mystery man saved you and then disappeared. Is that accurate?" Evelyn found herself smiling despite everything. "Surprisingly, yes. The news actually got something right for once. Do you know who he was?" "Not yet. We're working on it." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Evelyn could almost hear her mother's thoughts organizing themselves. "You're going to find him and try to repay him somehow. I'm going to thank him properly." "Yes, Evelyn." Her mother's tone shifted to something gentler, more concerned. "Not everyone wants to be found. If this man left without giving his name, maybe he has his reasons. I'm not going to hurt him," Evelyn said, a touch of defensiveness creeping into her voice. "I just want to express my gratitude." "I know, sweetheart, but be careful that gratitude doesn't turn into something else. People who save our lives can become larger than life in our minds. We project onto them qualities they may not actually have." Evelyn wanted to argue, but she was too tired for the philosophical debate her mother was clearly ready to have. "I'll be careful, I promise. And you'll actually rest, not work yourself into the ground like you usually do after a crisis. I'm literally sitting on my couch doing nothing right now, with your laptop open, I'm guessing." Evelyn glanced at the laptop screen, still displaying the viral video of her rescue. "I'll rest. Call you tomorrow." After they hung up, Evelyn did close the laptop, but she couldn't stop thinking about her mother's warning. Was she projecting, building up this stranger into some kind of hero, because she needed to believe someone could act without ulterior motives? She touched her throat, feeling the tenderness there, remembering the absolute certainty in the stranger's voice when he'd said, "I'm going to help you." Vita, no hesitation, no doubt, just calm competence in the face of her panic. Whatever else he might be, he'd known exactly what to do when it mattered most, and that was real, not projection. Evelyn finally went to bed around 2 a.m., her mind still active, but her body demanding rest. She fell asleep thinking about calloused hands and a voice that had promised help and delivered it, across the city into a modest apartment complex that would never make architecture magazines. Mark Reynolds sat on his daughter's bed, watching her sleep. He picked Sophie up from the sleepover an hour ago, and she chattered the entire drive home about her friend's new puppy and the movie they'd watched and the breakfast they'd had. Normal, happy 8-year-old concerns. She had no idea what had happened at the restaurant. He hadn't told her, wouldn't tell her. It wasn't relevant to her world, and Mark wanted to keep it that way. Sophie stirred, her small face peaceful in sleep. She looked like her mother. Same delicate features, same dark curls, and the resemblance still caught Mark off guard sometimes, even though Sarah had been gone for 3 years. Cancer, aggressive and merciless, taking her before Sophie was old enough to form lasting memories. Mark had promised Sarah in those final awful weeks that he'd make sure Sophie had a good life, that she'd never feel like she was missing anything, that she'd grow up knowing she was loved and safe, and capable of anything. He'd kept that promise. even when it meant working double shifts, even when it meant sacrificing his own needs and wants, even when exhaustion felt like a permanent state of being. Sophie was happy, healthy, and thriving. That was all that mattered. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Darius, his supervisor at the warehouse. "Dude, you're blowing up online. When were you going to tell me you saved a billionaire?" Mark's stomach dropped. He grabbed the phone, opened the link Darius had sent, and watched himself on a stranger's phone camera performing the Heimlich maneuver in an expensive restaurant. The video had been viewed 1.3 million times. The comments were already spiraling into speculation and narrative building. He scrolled through more links, feeling increasingly trapped. News articles, Twitter threads, Reddit discussions. Someone had already started calling him the invisible hero, and the name was catching on. There were entire comment chains dedicated to identifying him, people trading they, ories, and comparing screenshots. One commenter had posted, "Pretty sure this is the guy from Riverside Logistics. I've seen him there." Mark closed his eyes, dread settling in his chest like a physical weight. He tried to slip away quietly to avoid exactly this kind of attention, but it hadn't mattered. In the age of universal surveillance, privacy was an illusion. Someone was going to identify him, maybe by tomorrow, maybe by next week, but it was inevitable. Another text, this time from his friend Lisa, who worked the morning shift at Sophie's school. "Mark, I just saw you on the news. Are you okay? Is Sophie okay?" He typed back quickly, "We're fine. It was nothing really. Just helped someone who needed it. Nothing. You saved that tech CEO's life. They're calling you a hero." Mark didn't respond. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like someone who'd done the obvious thing. Someone had been choking. He'd known how to help, so he'd helped. The same thing he'd do for Sophie or Lisa or a complete stranger on the street. It didn't make him special. It made him a decent human being, which should have been the baseline. Not something worthy of viral videos. His phone kept buzzing. More texts, more links, more people who'd seen the video and recognized him or thought they had. His sister in Ohio, a former coworker, Sophie's pediatrician. Mark silenced the phone and set it face down on the nightstand. In the morning, he'd figure out how to handle this. Right now, he just wanted to sit with his daughter and pretend the outside world didn't exist. But even as he thought it, he knew the pretense was over. The video had been seen by millions. The woman he'd saved was Evelyn Cross, whose company had more resources than some countries. If she wanted to find him, she would. The question was, what happened after that? Mark had never wanted money or fame or recognition. He wanted to protect it, vied for Sophie to give her stability and love, and a chance at a future better than his present. He wanted to work his shifts, pay his bills, and live quietly without anyone paying attention to the man loading boxes in a warehouse at 2 a.m. But, apparently, saving someone's life meant giving up the right to anonymity, even if you didn't want credit, even if you tried to walk away. Sophie shifted in her sleep, and Mark automatically adjusted her blanket, tucking it around her small shoulders. Whatever happened next, he'd handle it the way he handled everything, by focusing on what actually mattered and ignoring everything else. The world could call him a hero, or a mystery, or whatever narrative they wanted to build. It didn't change who he was or what his responsibilities were. He was Sophie's dad. Everything else was just noise. By morning, Rachel had a name. She called Evelyn at 7 a.m., knowing her boss would already be awake despite the late night and medical trauma. Mark Reynolds, 32 years old, works night shift at Riverside Logistics, single father to an 8-year-old daughter, no criminal record, no outstanding debts, no social media presence to speak of. Evelyn sat up in bed, instantly alert. "How certain are we?" 95%. We cross-referenced employee photos from the warehouse, matched them to the clearest frames from the video, and got a positive ID. One of our security consultants actually knows the warehouse manager, confirmed Reynolds was scheduled last night, but called in, said he had something to take care of. Timeline matches perfectly. Address: Rachel rattled off an apartment complex in a working-class neighborhood on the east side of town, the kind of place where rent was affordable because everything else wasn't. Schools struggled, infrastructure was aging, opportunities were limited. Evelyn absorbed this information, feeling pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. A warehouse worker on night shift would have the kind of hands she'd felt, calloused from physical labor. A single father would have the confidence that came from handling emergencies alone, no backup. Someone living paycheck to paycheck would wear clothes until they fell apart and see dinner at Luminar as a rare extravagance worth splurging on. "What do you want me to do with this information?" Rachel asked carefully. "Good question. Evelyn could send flowers, a generic thank you card, money, all of which felt simultaneously inadequate and potentially insulting. She could do nothing. Respect his clear desire for anonymity, let him fade back into his normal life, or she could do what every instinct told her to do. Meet him face to face, look him in the eye, and try to understand who this man actually was. Nothing yet, Evelyn said, though she was already planning. I need to think about the right approach. The press is still building the story, Rachel warned. Someone's going to identify him publicly soon if they haven't already. You might want to reach out before that happens and he gets mobbed. She was right. She was right. Once his name went public, Mark Reynolds would be dealing with interview requests, social media harassment, people showing up at his workplace and home, the circus Evelyn had inadvertently created by being saved. Give me until this afternoon, Evelyn said. I'll decide by then. After hanging up, she sat in bed with her laptop, pulling up everything the internet had to offer about Mark Reynolds. It wasn't much. No Facebook, no Instagram, no Twitter, no LinkedIn, a digital ghost in an age where everyone performed their lives online. She found a newspaper article from 5 years ago, a human interest piece about a community fundraiser. Mark Reynolds had organized a toy drive for children's hospitals, motivated by his daughter's extended stays during her treatment for severe asthma. The accompanying photo showed a younger version of the man from the restaurant holding a small girl with dark curls and a bright smile. Another search turned up public records. Marriage license from 9 years ago, death certificate for Sarah Ann Reynolds. 3 years later, Evelyn did the math. Mark had been widowed at 29, left to raise a young daughter alone. She found his employment history through less official channels, a community college dropout, a series of jobs in warehousing and logistics, steady work, but nothing spectacular, no ambition for management, no night school for advancement, just consistent employment at places that offered health insurance and flexible scheduling. A man who'd prioritized stability over success, who'd built his life around his daughter's needs rather than his own advancement, who'd walked away from an opportunity to network with a billionaire CEO because he genuinely hadn't wanted anything from her. Evelyn closed the laptop, feeling something she rarely experienced, uncertainty about how to proceed. This wasn't a business negotiation where she could leverage power and resources. This was a person who'd helped her in a moment of desperate need and then deliberately chosen invisibility over reward. Her phone rang, her PR director calling with the morning's media update. 3 major outlets want interviews, David said without preamble. Good Morning America, local news, and a podcast with 5 million subscribers. They want the story, you, the choking incident, the mystery hero. It's a perfect human interest angle. I'm not doing interviews about this. Evelyn said flatly. With respect, we should capitalize on the positive coverage. You're trending for saving a life. Well, being saved, but the narrative is still sympathetic. It's good PR. David, I nearly died. This isn't a PR opportunity. Everything's a PR opportunity is. You frame it correctly. He paused, recognizing he'd pushed too far. But I understand if you'd prefer to keep this private. We can issue a statement thanking the public for their concern and leave it at that. Do that, Evelyn agreed, and make sure the statement emphasizes that I want to respect the privacy of the person who helped me. No speculation about his identity, no calls for him to come forward. Make it clear that we're not participating in the circus. Understood. Though I should warn you, someone's going to identify him regardless of what we say. The internet doesn't respect privacy requests, I know. Evelyn ended the call, already composing her next message. She texted Rachel. I want to meet with him today if possible, but quietly. No press, no security detail, just me. Can you arrange it? The response came quickly. Are you sure that's wise? We don't actually know this person. He saved my life. I think I owe him the benefit of the doubt. Meeting him in public then. Coffee shop, neutral territory. Agreed. Evelyn stood, heading to her closet to choose an outfit. Not the power suit she wore to intimidate competitors, not the casual luxury she wore to galas. Something normal, approachable, the kind of thing that wouldn't immediately scream wealth and power. She settled on dark jeans and a simple sweater, minimal jewelry, understated. Then she looked at herself in the mirror and laughed quietly at the absurdity. Evelyn Cross trying to dress down to meet a warehouse worker who'd saved her life and didn't want recognition. Her phone buzzed. Rachel again. He starts his shift at 11 p.m. We could approach him at the warehouse around 10:30. Catch him before work. No. Evelyn didn't want to corner him at his job. Didn't want to make this about power dynamics. Find out when he's dropping his daughter at school. I'll approach him then. Casual, just a conversation. That's bored. Just a conversation. That's bored. Or line stalking. That's showing up to say thank you. Okay, but I'm coming with you. Safety protocol. Evelyn didn't argue. Rachel would insist. And, honestly, showing up alone might be more intimidating than showing up with an assistant. At least with Rachel there, it was clearly a professional courtesy, rather than something more personal. Though what exactly it was becoming, Evelyn wasn't entirely sure, but Mark woke to Sophie bouncing on his bed, her standard morning greeting when she was in a good mood. Dad, Mrs. Chen said, we're getting a class pet, probably a hamster. Can we get a hamster too? Mark groaned, squinting at the clock. 7:15 a.m., which meant he'd gotten about 4 hours of sleep after his shift. Sophie, we've talked about pets. The apartment doesn't allow, but a hamster is really small. It would live in a cage, please. He sat up, pulling her into a hug that made her giggle and squirm. We'll see. Now go brush your teeth. You've got school in an hour. Sophie scampered off, already chattering about hamster names, and Mark allowed himself 1 more minute of rest before hauling himself out of bed. His body ached in the specific way that came from lifting boxes for 8 hours, and his ribs were sore from yesterday's exertion. The Heimlich maneuver looked simple in diagrams, but executing it properly required significant force. He'd have bruises. His phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Mark ignored all of them, focusing instead on the morning routine. Breakfast for Sophie, packing her lunch, finding her homework that she swore she'd put in her backpack, but was actually under the couch. Normal, familiar, the parts of life that mattered. Dad, why does your phone keep buzzing? Sophie asked through a mouthful of cereal. Work stuff, Mark said, which was easier than explaining that strangers on the internet were obsessed with a video of him 7. She's someone's life, nothing important. They walked to school together like always, Sophie, holding his hand and telling him elaborate stories about her friend's new puppy. Mark listened with half his attention, the rest scanning their surroundings out of habit, checking for traffic, watching for anything unusual, the hypervigilance of a parent who'd learned that danger could come from anywhere. He didn't notice the expensive town car parked down the block, or the 2 women inside watching them through tinted windows. At the school gates, Sophie hugged him tight. Love you, Dad. See you after work. Love you too, sweetheart. Be good. He watched until she disappeared inside, then started the walk back to their apartment. He had 4 hours before he needed to sleep, which meant time to do laundry, buy groceries, and maybe catch up on the household repairs he'd been putting off. Mr. Reynolds, the voice made him turn. A woman stood beside the town car. He hadn't noticed, dressed too well for this neighborhood, her expression professional, but not unfriendly. Beside her stood another woman, and Mark's breath caught as he recognized her from yesterday. The one he'd saved, though she looked different without terror in her eyes. Evelyn Cross stepped forward and Mark instinctively stepped back, his heart rate spiking. I'm sorry to approach you like this, Evelyn said quickly, reading his discomfort. I know this is unexpected. I just wanted to thank you in person for what you did. Mark glanced around, suddenly aware that anyone could be watching, filming, posting. How did you find me? I have resources, Evelyn admitted. I know that sounds ominous, but I promise my intentions are good. I just wanted to express my gratitude. You don't need to, Mark said, the same words he'd used in the restaurant. I'm glad you're okay. That's enough. It's not enough for me, Evelyn's voice carried quiet intensity. You saved my life. I can't just send a card and move on. Why not? Mark asked, genuinely confused. That's what people do. Send cards, say thanks, move on with their lives. Evelyn blinked, clearly not expecting the question. Because what you did was extraordinary. It was the Heimlich maneuver. They teach it in basic first aid. It's not extraordinary. It's just necessary. It's not extraordinary. It's just necessary. They stood facing each other on the sidewalk, 2 people from completely different worlds, neither quite sure how to bridge the gap. Rachel, sensing the conversation stalling, stepped forward. Mr. Reynolds, would you be willing to have coffee with Miss Cross? Just a conversation, nothing more. 15 minutes of your time. Mark looked at them both, the billionaire CEO, who'd nearly died, and the efficient assistant who'd tracked him down, and felt the weight of obligation settling on his shoulders. He didn't want this, didn't want attention or gratitude or whatever complicated social debt they thought he'd created, but he also recognized that sometimes you didn't get to choose your responsibilities. Sometimes they chose you. 15 minutes, he agreed, But somewhere quiet, no cameras, Evelyn's expression shifted to something that might have been relief or gratitude or both. I know just the place. They ended up at a small diner 6 blocks from Sophie's school, the kind of place with vinyl booths and laminated menus that hadn't changed since the 9S. Evelyn had never been inside an establishment like this, and Rachel looked actively uncomfortable as they slid into a corner booth. But Mark seemed to relax slightly once they were seated away from the windows. "Coffee?" the waitress asked, appearing with a pot before anyone answered. Her name tag read Donna, and she had the efficient wariness of someone who'd worked this shift for 20 years. "Please," Mark said, turning over his cup. He knew Donna had brought Sophie here for pancakes on her birthday last year, and the familiarity of the surroundings helped counter the surreal nature of sitting across from one of the wealthiest women in the country. Evelyn and Rachel both nodded, and Donna poured without comment, though her eyes lingered on Evelyn with faint recognition. "Let me know if you need anything else." After she left, silence settled over the table. Rachel busied herself with her phone, clearly trying to give them space while remaining present. Mark added cream to his coffee with steady hands, and Evelyn found herself watching the simple gesture, noting again the calluses, the competence, the lack of self-consciousness. "I meant what I said," Evelyn began, wrapping her hands around her own cup. "I wanted to thank you properly. What you did was basic first aid," Mark interrupted gently. "Anyone could have done it, but no one else did." Evelyn leaned forward slightly. The restaurant was full of people, educated, successful people, and they all froze. "You didn't." Mark shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "They probably didn't know what to do. I learned the Heimlich when my daughter was younger. She has severe asthma, used to have attacks where she couldn't breathe. I took every safety course I could find because I needed to know how to help her." Something in Evelyn's expression shifted, understanding replacing curiosity. "Your daughter Sophie, right?" Mark's eyes sharpened, a flash of protective concern crossing his features. "How do you know her name?" "Public records," Rachel said quietly, looking up from her phone. "The fundraiser article from a few years ago. We weren't trying to invade your privacy, just trying to understand who you were." "Why?" Mark asked, his tone not hostile, but genuinely confused. "I helped someone who needed it. That should be the end of it. Why does it matter?" "Are who I am." Evelyn sat down her coffee cup, studying him with the same intensity she brought to negotiating billion dollars. "Because in my world, everyone has an agenda. Everyone wants something. But you saved my life, and then walked away from the opportunity to leverage that into anything useful. It's—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Unusual." "It's decent," Mark corrected. "Or at least it should be. I don't want anything from you, Miss Cross. I'm not looking for a job or money or connections or whatever people in your world trade in. I just want to go back to my regular life and pretend none of this happened." "That's not possible anymore," Rachel said, her tone apologetic but firm. "The video has been viewed millions of times. Someone's going to identify you publicly if they haven't already. You're about to become a story whether you like it or not." Mark's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask to be a story." "No," Evelyn agreed. "You asked to be left alone, but I'm afraid that ship has sailed, which is partly why I wanted to find you first, to warn you what's coming and to offer help managing it." "Managing it," Mark repeated, something hard entering his voice. "You mean PR, controlling the narrative, making me into some kind of character in your company's brand story?" "No," Evelyn said sharply, stung by the accuracy of his cynicism. "I mean protecting your privacy and your daughter's safety. I mean making sure when reporters show up at your work or your home or Sophie's school, you have resources to deal with it. I mean giving you options instead of leaving you to drown in attention you never wanted." Mark stared at her, trying to read whether this was genuine concern or sophisticated manipulation. In his experience, wealthy people didn't help without expecting returns. It was one of the many unwritten rules that separated his world from theirs. "What kind of options?" he asked, care. Fully, Evelyn glanced at Rachel, who pulled out a tablet and opened a document. "We've drafted a statement you could release. Brief, respectful, asking for privacy. We can also have our legal team send cease and desist letters to any media outlets that harass you or Sophie, and if you need security for a few days while the initial frenzy dies down." "Security?" Mark interrupted, the word foreign in his mouth. "For what? I'm a warehouse worker, not a celebrity." "You saved a billionaire CEO's life," Rachel said bluntly. "That makes you interesting to a lot of people with cameras and microphones. Some of them will be respectful, others won't be." Mark thought about Sophie, about her walking to school past reporters or being photographed without permission. The idea made his stomach turn. I can't afford security. You wouldn't have to, Evelyn said. Consider it part of my thank you along with covering any legal fees or other expenses that come up because of this situation. I don't want your money, Mark said, the words coming out harder than he'd intended. I appreciate the offer, but I don't need charity. It's not charity, Evelyn countered, matching his tone. It's compensation for disrupting your life. I didn't ask you to save me and you didn't ask for the consequences, but here we are. The least I can do is make sure those consequences don't hurt you or your daughter. They sat in tense silence, the clatter of dishes and low conversation from other diners filling the space between them. Donna appeared with the coffee pot, refilling their cups without being asked, her presence a brief interruption that gave everyone a moment to breathe. After she left, Mark spoke more quietly. Miss Cross, I understand you're trying to help. I do, but in my experience, when rich people offer help, there are strings attached, expectations, obligations. I've worked hard to build a life where I don't owe anyone anything, where Sophie and I are independent. I'm not eager to complicate that. There are no strings, Evelyn said, and she was surprised to realize she meant it. I'm not trying to buy you or own you, or turn you into a prop for my image. I genuinely just want to help mitigate the damage I've caused by being saved in a public place. Mark studied her face, looking for the lie, the angle, the hidden agenda. But Evelyn Cross, whatever else she might be, met his gaze directly, and he saw something there that surprised him. Guilt. She actually felt responsible for what was happening to him. Why does this matter so much to you? He asked. Plenty of people get saved every day. EMTs, firefighters, random strangers doing CPR. The world doesn't stop for them, because most of those people aren't me, Evelyn said with a self-awareness that bordered on bitter. Because when it happens to someone famous, it becomes a spectacle, and I hate that you're caught in that spectacle when you deliberately tried to avoid it. Rachel's phone buzzed insistently. She glanced at it, her expression tightening. We have a prob.